I told you to stop! How dare you trim these trees without permission! Get out of here right now!
What is the problem?
We are just working.
I've told him countless times about the spraying, and now look.
All right, ma'am, slow down. Can you show us exactly where on the map?
It's right here, past this row.
Karen called the cops on my orchard, claiming I was trespassing on HOA property. She showed up yelling at my workers, threatening fines, and acting like she owned the entire place. So she dialed the police with a smug smile, completely convinced I was about to be kicked off the land. The only problem? I actually own the land her entire HOA sits on before we move on. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Daniel Carter, and I've owned that orchard for nearly 15 years. It's a quiet stretch of land just outside town, filled with rows of apple and peach trees. My father and I planted long before the neighborhood next door even existed. Back then, the area was mostly farmland. Over time, developers started buying up nearby fields and building houses. Eventually, a neat little suburban community popped up right beside my property. That neighborhood came with a HOA, of course. At first, we stayed out of each other's way. My orchard had its own entrance road, and the residents mostly kept to themselves. Some of them would even stop by in the fall to buy fresh fruit. It was peaceful. But about 6 months ago, a new resident moved into the neighborhood. Her name was Linda Harper. And from the moment she arrived, she acted like she had been elected ruler of the entire street. Linda quickly became one of the loudest voices in the HOA. She was constantly patrolling the neighborhood, pointing out things she thought didn't match community standards. If someone left their trash can out too long or parked a little crooked, she'd be the first to complain. At first, I didn't think much about it. My orchard wasn't part of the HOA, so whatever rules they had didn't apply to me, or at least, that's what I thought. One morning while my workers were pruning some of the apple trees near the edge of the property, a shiny SUV rolled up beside the fence. Out stepped Linda. Behind her was another woman from the neighborhood. A quiet follower named Carol Simmons, who always seemed to agree with everything Linda said. Linda marched straight up to the fence with her phone already in her hand. "Excuse me," she shouted at my workers. "What do you think you're doing back there?" My foreman, Miguel Torres, looked confused. "Whoa, working," he said. Linda crossed her arms like she had just caught someone committing a crime. "This land belongs to the HOA now," she declared. "You can't just come here and start cutting trees without permission." Miguel tried to explain that the orchard had always been privately owned, but Linda didn't want to hear it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything. The workers, the equipment, even the property line marker that had been sitting there for years. "That's fine," she said smugly. "I'm documenting all of this." By the time I arrived about 20 minutes later, Linda was already pacing back and forth outside the fence like a security guard who had just discovered a major incident. And the moment she saw me pull up in my truck, she pointed straight at me like she had been waiting for this moment all morning. "Oh good," she said loudly. "You must be the one responsible for this." I stepped out of the truck slowly, trying to figure out what exactly was going on. "I'm Daniel," I said calmly. "I own the orchard." Linda let out a short laugh. "No, you don't." I blinked. "Excuse me, this property," she said, gesturing dramatically toward the trees, "was transferred to the HOA during the neighborhood expansion, which means you and your little crew are trespassing." Miguel looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or call a lawyer, but Linda wasn't joking. In fact, she looked more confident by the second. Then she did something that made the whole situation even crazier. She lifted her phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. "Yes," she said into the phone. "I'd like to report multiple people trespassing on HOA property." She glanced over at me with a satisfied smile. "I already warned them to leave." Then she added one last line while staring directly at me. "And now they're refusing." That's when I realized Linda Harper had absolutely no idea who she was messing with. I stood there for a second just watching Linda, trying to decide if she was serious or if this was some kind of strange misunderstanding, but the smug look on her face told me she fully believed what she was saying. Meanwhile, Miguel and the other workers had stopped pruning the trees and were quietly standing by the truck. Clearly unsure if they were about to witness an argument or an arrest, and Linda seemed to enjoy every second of the attention as she kept pacing along the fence like she was guarding a national monument, occasionally pointing at the orchard and whispering something to Carol, who nodded along like a supportive assistant. I calmly asked Linda where exactly she got the idea that the HOA owned my orchard, and without hesitation, she pulled out a folded set of papers from her purse, waving them in the air like they were the ultimate proof of victory, explaining that during the neighborhood's latest development phase, the builder supposedly included this land as part of the community's green space, which was honestly the first time I had ever heard that claim in 15 years of owning the property. I asked if she had actually checked the county property records, but Linda just rolled her eyes and said the HOA board had already confirmed everything during one of their meetings, which apparently meant more to her than official land documents. While she was still talking, I noticed a few curious neighbors gathering at the end of the street, watching the situation unfold from a distance, and Linda clearly noticed them too because her voice suddenly got louder and more dramatic as she repeated that trespassing on HOA land was a serious offense, as if she was giving a speech instead of having a conversation. A few minutes later, we could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance, and Linda's expression instantly shifted into pure satisfaction, like someone who had been waiting all day for the grand finale, while Miguel leaned over to me and quietly asked if we should call a lawyer just in case. But I told him not to worry because something told me this situation was about to turn in a direction Linda definitely wasn't expecting. A few minutes later, the police cruiser pulled up beside the road, and two officers stepped out, clearly expecting some kind of neighborhood dispute. But Linda immediately rushed toward them like she had been waiting for backup in a movie scene, pointing straight at me and my workers while loudly explaining that we were illegally cutting trees on HOA property and refusing to leave when she ordered us to, and the confidence in her voice made it sound like the case was already closed. Officer Patel studied the documents for a moment, then handed them to Officer Grant, who compared the map to the property marker sitting right beside the fence, and the two of them quietly exchanged a look that immediately made Linda uneasy. She tried to interrupt, insisting that the HOA board had already confirmed the land belonged to the neighborhood, but Officer Patel calmly asked if she had any official documents proving that claim, and suddenly the stack of papers she had been waving earlier didn't seem nearly as convincing, because when he actually looked at them, they were just printed pages from a community newsletter and a development proposal, not a legal transfer of property ownership. Meanwhile, a few more neighbors had gathered near the road, whispering to each other as they watched the situation unfold, and Linda's confident posture slowly started slipping as Officer Grant pointed to the boundary marker and explained that according to the county map, the orchard land had never been transferred to the HOA at all. In fact, the property line clearly showed that my land extended farther than most of the neighborhood probably realized, which meant the entire strip of decorative trees and the small walking path the residents liked to use near the back fence were technically sitting on my property too. When Officer Patel calmly explained this out loud, you could practically feel the shift in the air as several neighbors looked at each other in surprise, while Linda's face went completely pale because the same land she had just accused me of trespassing on was actually part of my original parcel. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked like someone who had just realized she might have created a very big problem for herself. The silence that followed was almost painful, because a few minutes earlier Linda had been standing there acting like the undisputed authority of the neighborhood. But now every pair of eyes was on her as Officer Patel calmly explained that property ownership isn't determined by HOA meetings or neighborhood assumptions, it's determined by county records, and according to those records the orchard had been registered under my name for over 15 years with no transfer, no shared agreement, and absolutely no legal claim from the HOA. One of the neighbors quietly asked if that meant the walking path behind their houses was also on my land. And Officer Grant checked the map again before nodding, which caused a small wave of murmurs among the group, because many of them had always believed that Strip was part of the community greenbelt. Linda quickly tried to regain control of the situation, insisting there had to be some mistake, and that the developer told the HOA the orchard area would eventually become shared space. But Officer Patel simply explained that eventually doesn't mean ownership unless an official land transfer actually happened, and in this case it never did. At that point, Linda turned toward me with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, asking why I never told the neighborhood about this before. And I honestly had to stop myself from laughing because, until 10 minutes ago, nobody had ever accused me of trespassing on my own orchard. So there had never really been a reason to make an announcement. Meanwhile, Miguel and the crew were trying very hard to look busy around the truck while clearly enjoying the moment. And the neighbors who had gathered started realizing that the person who called the police to remove someone from HOA property had accidentally revealed that the HOA itself had been using land it didn't actually own for years. At that point, the entire situation had completely flipped, because the same neighbors who had quietly watched Linda call the police were now staring at the property map, like they had just discovered a secret about their own neighborhood. And one of them finally asked the question that made Linda look even more uncomfortable. If Daniel owns this land, does that mean the HOA never had permission to build the walking path back here in the first place? Officer Patel calmly explained that technically any improvements built on private land usually require an agreement with the owner. And since there was no record of one, the HOA board would probably want to sort that out quickly before it turned into a legal issue. Suddenly, Linda, who had been shouting orders half an hour earlier, was standing there completely silent, while several neighbors slowly realized she had just created a massive problem for the very HOA she was trying to defend. I eventually told the officers it was all a misunderstanding, and that my workers would simply continue pruning the orchard, like we had planned that morning, and both officers nodded before heading back to their cruiser, leaving Linda awkwardly standing beside the fence she had been guarding like a security checkpoint. As Miguel restarted the equipment and the crew went back to work, I heard one of the neighbors quietly say to another, "So she called the cops on the guy who owns the land." And the last thing I saw before driving off was Linda staring at the property marker, like she wished it had never been there in the first place. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more crazy HOA drama like this, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories just like this one. And if you've ever had a wild experience with a neighbor or a HOA, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. Who knows? Your story might be the next one featured here.